Welcome to Moments That Matter. We are your co-hosts. I'm Paul Shotsberger. I'm professor of education at Southern Wesleyan University.
And I'm Scott Williams, friend and online chaplain here at Southern Wesleyan University.
So in this podcast, we're going to be looking at what we call moments that matter, moments that come along in our lives that have long-term consequences, especially those moments that have to do with a choice of vocation. So we will be talking to each other, interviewing each other. We will also be interviewing other people. And where this idea comes from is a book by Parker Palmer, and it's called Let Your Life Speak. And it is all about finding your vocation. And in that book, he talks about something called clearness committee in the Quaker tradition. And this is where someone who has a life choice to make will be surrounded by those who are older, wiser, and who will simply ask questions of the person in order to gain some kind of clarity on that life choice. Unfortunately, not all of us have access to a clearness committee. However, we maintain that there are these clearness committee moments in our lives that come along that we really need to pay attention to. And so whether we pay attention to them or not, they can have consequences in our lives. And we want to recognize those times. We want to celebrate those times in our lives and in others' lives, especially when they are recognized and especially when we have God in mind in those choices and decisions. But we also understand that that's not always the case. And so we want to present all of it to you, the good, the bad, the ugly, in terms of our clearness committee moments. Our hope is that the podcast will cause you to think of some of the moments in your life that might have been similar to this with perhaps new clarity, or even moments that you're facing right now.
Lovely. Dr. Shotsberger, higher ed, 26 years, taught math, 7 years. Did you always want to be a teacher?
Oh, no. And that's actually what this podcast is a lot about, is we have dreams growing up, but sometimes they're not our dreams. Sometimes they're other people's dreams. We think they're our dreams, and we pursue them for quite a while. I mentioned Parker Palmer at the introduction. He pursued other people's dreams for 35 years of his life before he realized that actually they weren't his dreams. Growing up, my dreams mostly came from my father. He was in the Navy during World War II, and he always regretted getting out of the Navy, and even though he had a very successful career. But when I came along, he saw his chance to right that wrong and rectify the situation. And so from a very, very young age, I was going around to naval stations, air stations. I was going to air shows. I was anything Navy that you could possibly imagine, and especially if it had to do with flying. That was the number one dream. So this pretty much consumed my growing up to the point that come high school, I applied for the Naval Academy, didn't get in. Then I applied for ROTC scholarship, did get that. And so I had a scholarship. I was going off to college. They said that I have to do 4 years of Navy, but I said, I'll do 20, 30. I don't care, because this is my life. This is the thing that I want to do.
So, speaking of Navy, what did you want to do while you were in the Navy?
I wanted to fly jets, and that was a good dream until about senior year in high school, when I first got glasses. And back then, you couldn't have glasses or contacts and fly. Now it's a little bit different. But that was kind of a slight deterrent, but nonetheless, I was just I press on. And Then got in college, and I will make a very long story short on this. I came down with pneumonia and flu. And those two things don't really go well together. And so I wound up blowing out an eardrum. And that was it for flying. That I knew that was it.
So would you say these were roadblocks to what you desire to do in the Navy? Were there others?
Actually, there were many. But they would come a little bit later once I was in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we can talk about that too.
Was your committee of clarity moment in the Navy when you were realizing what God might have for you after the time that you spent there?
Yeah, I would say that, probably that moment for me, which I did not pay complete attention to, was getting the pneumonia and blowing out the eardrum. The one good thing that I did and the one right thing that I did was I got back to college and I changed my major because I had been straight math because Navy, and I switched to math because I, somewhere in the back of my mind, had thought, maybe I could teach or something like that. So just, I guess, as a backup, and I switched major, and that turned out to be a decision with very long-term consequences because ultimately that's what I went into.
Yeah. So these roadblocks kind of came while you were there in the Navy. Was it difficult to lay down the dream of the Navy and what you were doing there for the illustrious world of teaching?
It was difficult for my father.
Mm.
That, his dream was dead, and he never really thought much of teaching. But nonetheless, I was already married. I was doing deployments while married, which is a horrible situation to be in. And so I just had to sit him down, and I just had to say, things are different between you and me. When you were in the Navy, you were single, and, fancy free and all these other things that I'm not, and it's really doing damage to my marriage. So I had not, such a difficult time making the transition because by then I've been through 2 6-month deployments, and the last one was really, really awful. And so I was ready to get out. Eventually, my dad was okay with the idea. But even as a teacher, he never really kind of bought the whole thing. The thing that finally changed his mind was when I got my doctorate, and I was Dr. Shotsberger, and then it was okay then, I was respected.
So that's a great point. How long would you say was the amount of time that it took him to come to grips with your new direction from the Navy?
Well,
until the doctorate.
I taught high school for 7 years. That's pretty much how long it took. It literally, it was day and night. It was just this instant thing. Dad, I'm going to get my doctorate. Oh, well then, I guess teaching's fine. that's just the way it is. Yeah.
Did you feel like, and I think people commonly feel this way when they're sandwiched between forces pulling on them in one direction or another. Did you feel that it was sort of a letting him down, or was it more of a feeling of he'll come along to what you knew was right?
Yeah, to some extent he'll come along, but also I did throw in one bone. I have to throw this, in here because he did regret getting out of the Navy off of active duty, but his major regret was that he never stuck with the reserves. And he told me when I got out, do not get out of the reserves. And actually, I thought that was great advice because I knew I wasn't going to make much money teaching. And so, great to have the second income. So in that way, I could keep on going with my career and I could keep on being promoted, which is actually the most important thing in my dad. And actually, I wound up retiring out of the reserves after 16 years. So, it all worked out.
I think this would probably be an area that our students fall into frequently, trying to please some family member, friend, significant other. and they find themselves caught in between what they feel led to and what others are suggesting, what would be your advice to someone caught in that middle?
Well, the issue is that you actually have to know yourself pretty well. And so even if you are willing to stand up, the question is, do you know what you're standing up for? Parker Palmer talks a lot about knowing who you are, and that's way more important than knowing what you want to do. And so, unfortunately, as a young person, a lot of times we don't have a fully formed opinion of who we are and what we want to do and that sort of thing. And so we have to kind of go along for a while before we kind of figure it out. The problem is, of course, if you're getting a college degree and you don't know why you're doing it, you're also accruing debt at the same time. And so it gets like a deeper and deeper hole. For those, however, I will say that definitely once you're out of the home, and definitely once you're, let's say in college, try things out. Just, take as many courses as you can, talk to as many people as you possibly can, but just expect that there'll be a little bit of pushback from family, from friends. We've experienced this not just with my father, not just with family, but all through our lives. Decisions that we've made, people don't understand, and you just, if you know that this is what you need to do, then you just need to do it, and it just doesn't matter what people say. At the same time, of course, you're not being foolish, and you're being wise about it, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good counsel for people who, as you say, are being shaped by their experiences, and a new world is being opened to them, and juxtaposing that with what they felt like they always wanted to do, or somebody always told them to do. It's a freeing moment, but it's a nerve-wracking moment. So we touched on your move from the Navy into education. What would you say was the influence or influences that led you from teaching math for those 7 years to moving to higher ed?
Money. So almost immediately when I started teaching, I also started a master's program because I knew that was the only way I was going to increase my salary. And let me just be clear about this and why money actually was kind of a driving force. When I left the Navy and when I started teaching, I took a 50% salary cut. And that was difficult. And so I had the reserves, but it's not that much money. So I knew, okay, if I get a master's, I get a bump in pay. Also, my school was willing to pay for the master's. Hard to walk away from that. So that just kind of happened. Though there is another story behind that, which I'll save for another time. But then the doctorate was simply juxtaposition. We had gone back to Chapel Hill. We were in, the locale, and that's where I wanted to get a doctorate, and it was handy, literally. That's and did I know what exactly was going to be done with that doctorate? No, I had no idea. I knew that I wanted to work with teachers, but beyond that, I really had no idea.
Yeah. For that transition, who or what served as your clearness committee for moving from one to the other?
Actually, that happened right after I got out of the Navy. I took 2 graduate level courses at Chapel Hill, and there was a professor who I had as an undergrad, and I took a graduate course from him in curriculum. And in the interim between undergrad and taking this course, I had become somehow vaguely related to him. My wife her older sister had married his son. And so somehow, I don't even know what that's called, but anyway, so we knew each other on a basis other than just, professor and student. And he thought that I had some kind of, ability, I don't know what he would call it, competence. And we were walking out of the class the last day, and he turned to me and he said, "You know what?" He said, "You should go someplace and get a master's and then come back here and get your doctorate." and I hadn't thought about a master's. I hadn't thought about a doctorate. I hadn't thought about anything that he, had just talked about. And then he walked off, and that was that moment, and I could not possibly ignore it. This is a guy I really, really liked and respected. And so literally that's what I did. I got my master's at UNC Charlotte and then came back to Chapel Hill and I got a doctorate. Just like he said. Yeah.
Wow. So you get back to Chapel Hill, smooth sailing from there. Piece of cake.
No, not so much. Yeah, because I couldn't start the doctorate right away. And so there was a year there where I had to teach public school. And that was good. That turned out actually to be crucial to what I wanted to do in the future because I had only taught private school up to that point. And all of the public universities want you to have had experience in both. So I had the experience in Durham public schools, which is really interesting. Anyway, so I taught geometry and I taught consumer math. I taught consumer math to mostly seniors who only needed one more unit of math to graduate. And basically they didn't want to be there and neither did I. And there were definitely kids that just did not want to cooperate. I mean, there were kids that were willing to be there, willing to do the work because they had to. And then there were kids who were just going to fight you every step of the way. And there was this one kid and he was just angry. I don't know why. I assume from home, but anyway. And we had our run-ins, and he was just resisting. Finally, one day, I gave a test to everybody, and I handed the test out. Everybody took it. He just sat there, stone-faced, just looking at the paper and not doing anything. So come time for the end of the exam, I say, everybody pass up your exams. He doesn't do anything. I say, I need your exam. He wads it up, he throws it on the floor, and he says, grade that. And, I'm not real good at comebacks, but that day I was. And I said, I already did.
Wow.
And, of course, the rest of the students are like, whoa, yeah, right. So, of course, I thought that this would further alienate the kid, and I really did not intend at all to do any of that. The kid comes in the next day, he's got his book, he opens the book, he's ready to work, and, hey, Mr. Shotsberger, how's it going? And somehow, that bit of attention, as negative as it was what he needed, and I had absolutely no idea. And so there were incidents like that all throughout the year of people that I just didn't know how to reach. And then I reached them in the weirdest way. There was a girl who was, she's a senior, and come to find her daughter, she had a daughter, senior in high school, was the same age as my son. They'd both just been born. They were like 4 or 5 months. And so we would just compare notes, about raising a child and all this other stuff. And so I'm comparing notes with an 18-year-old, about how to, what to do with these kids and everything else like that. And that was my way in. And I wouldn't have guessed that in 1,000 years, And so it was just a completely different culture. And so it changed the way that I thought about teacher training later, and especially classroom management. And it actually provided me a lot of stories to tell to my students. But anyway, that was that year. And then I started on the doctoral program. But yeah, I mean, doctorate is just, you're in it. It's just really a lot of work. And but I felt like I knew what I needed to do all the way through. Was I ready to quit at various times? Of course, everyone is. But mostly, I had a goal. It was to be done in 3 years. And everybody laughed. They thought that was crazy. And that's exactly what happened, is I was done in 3 years. And I got the only secondary math ed job in North Carolina that year. And so I thought, okay, well, I guess that's what I'm doing. that's how far I had thought about, what I would do with a doctorate. So, it's even once it can be a little bit rough, kind of pursuing that thing that that you're supposed to do. There are no guarantees.
Wow. So when you were working on your doctorate, was it that mentality, I'm going to finish in 3 years, that was always present and kind of a driving force?
Always.
And then while you were going through it, did you have your sights set on the job that you got afterward, or was it something that was presented to you once you finished?
Well, I had taught, as being a graduate assistant, I had taught a math class, and then I had also supervised student teachers. So that was my background at the college level. And so this job came open. It was in a math department. It was math ed. It was working with student teachers. It was pretty much exactly what I had done in my program. And so, it was just a good fit. But did I think about that? Really, the experience that I had, I can see now, looking back, God just set all of that up, from the public school teaching to the supervision of the student teachers to teaching a math class. And also, by the way, in my master's program, having 18 hours of math in the program, because that's what allowed the math department to say, he's got enough math to be able to teach the math that we need him to teach. And so did I plan any of that? No. And so, I think when you're yielded like that, God will take care of you. And if you are just okay with what Parker Palmer calls way closed behind you, and you don't try to keep on beating those doors down that close, then you kind of turn around and see the open door in front of you and just move through it and trust God that He's going to take care of you.
So I'm sure at the time you were being obedient and walking through what was in front of you. Can you now look back and see instances of thin spaces where God interjected himself or directed you, maybe sovereignly, that you didn't realize at the time, but now looking back, you can see, wow, everything I did was charted by his divine hand?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And not to say that everything's been fruitful. Let me be clear about this. There were decisions that were made that were redeemed, and that's amazing. That's God's grace. But there were also decisions that just wound up wasting a lot of effort and energy and wound up being fairly embarrassing and, just really didn't go anywhere. So I think that there's all of that at work in these moments. We either recognize the moment or we don't recognize the moment. But within that, we have God in mind. We don't have God in mind. God redeems. God doesn't redeem. It's just all of that, I think. And I can say, now, looking back in terms of getting the doctorate, why did I do that? It wasn't for that job. It wasn't for the university job that I got after getting the doctorate. It was for becoming a missionary. That's actually what it was for. And that took a long time to play out. And again, just kind of trusting, well, God, I believe you know what you're doing, because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing.
So if you could have a conversation with Paul Shotsberger now, with early Navy recruit Paul Shotsberger, what would you say to him with the wisdom that you have now?
Well, I'd say, go for the scholarship. That's fine. That's a great way to pay for college. But just realize probably what you're talking about is 4 years. And again, this is a whole other story, but don't go for the nuclear power program. That was the loss. That was the wasted time in that part of my career. But anyway.
But it sounds so cool, though.
It does sound cool, and that's exactly why I did it. And that's exactly why you shouldn't do it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's good. So next time, then, love to hear more about moving from education stateside to education internationally.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing to see in our retrospective perspectives to look at the small decisions, the small yeses to God's prompts that then translate to large redirections. And I think that's what we've seen, and I think that's what people are longing for. I feel like a lot of times people want to go from 0 to 100 in no time flat, and God's saying, there's some things I need you to go through before that shape you, that I need you to be in those positions before. I heard somebody say, if God wants to make grass, he takes a day. If he wants to make an oak, he takes 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to be said for experience and these moments that matter, and surrounding ourselves with great clearness committees that provide the wisdom that was the exhortation in Proverbs, that with the many advisors, decisions are made. Excellent. I love everything about it. And with that, we'll check in next time, pick up in Ukraine. Thanks for checking in.